When I walked in this morning and people saw me with the fishing rods, they said to me, "Pastor, are we going fishing?" And I said, "Well, what a coincidence." Because there's this workshop that I do, and it's called Let's Go Fishing. And it's a hour and a half presentation that I do. I've been asked to present this at various churches. I was asked to present this at the ministerial convention that took place down in Mississauga, and we had people from all over, and we had a great turnout for the workshop. And I had people afterwards ask me, and I had the conference ask me, if there was a way I could take that 1 hour and a half message and turn it into 4 segments for training other churches. And I'm like, where am I going to get the time to do that? And then I realized that if I turned it into a sermon where I'm going to be preaching here at Pt1, I could get it done. I've been wanting to share this with you for quite a while. And again, it was a part of our strategy and our strategic plan to help you become a contagious Christian, for us to live out our mission-driven mission of inviting others to follow Jesus. And we've shared with you that we know that you can't share what you've never been trained to share, or some of you don't know how because, well, nobody's ever taught you. Now, if this is your first time here at our church, or you've never been here before, or you've rarely been with us, this is going to be not your typical sermon or your typical church service or presentation, because one of my roles as a pastor, and it's my primary, not my only role, but my primary role is to actually train and equip people to share their faith. My job is to train you, equip you, and release you to share Jesus. And you might be here thinking, well, that's kind of not what I'm about right now. Understand there will be principles in these presentations that would help you build relationships, build families. If you're a business person, it'll help you build a corporation, because these principles are about how we interact with other human beings around us. So there's a little something in this for everyone. So understand that we've been on this journey, again, to learn how to share our faith and become a contagious Christian. Again, the workshop series that I have been taking from church to church and place to place was entitled Let's Go Fishing. I am breaking it up into segments, and as such, today, segment number 1 is actually entitled One Size Does Not Fit All. Now, this workshop in this series is based on one Bible text and one Bible text only. Can you guess what Bible text that might be if I'm going to be talking about fishing? Yes. Okay, so you're thinking of the story where they were out fishing and Jesus said, cast over to the side, and they were catching fish. That's a great Bible story. I'm thinking of a Bible text involving Jesus and the disciples when they were actually fishing. Do you know the Bible text? I'm hearing it now. It is Mark 4:19. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are times when Jesus wants to make a point, he wants to teach a lesson, and he will take things we are familiar with in the physical, and he will give them a spiritual application. Have you ever noticed this? For example, when Jesus said, a sower went out to sow, was reaping and sowing and farming and planting seed a very real thing. He took a very real physical thing we do, and he gave it a spiritual application. And I've noticed that God will often take things we know and are common to us and then use that to teach us and grow us. So when Jesus comes up to a group of fishermen and he says, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men," do you think that might have resonated with them? So, as somebody who loves to fish, and somebody who is an avid fisherman, I have discovered along the way in my 40-something years, plus years of being a Seventh-day Adventist, that there are things that I do as a fisherman that could actually be used and translate over into reaching other people and communicating with other people important ideas, things like the gospel of salvation. Now, it's one thing for a person to say, I love fishing and I go fishing, but it's another to actually be a fisherman who can actually catch fish. I know a lot of people who like to fish, they want to fish, they don't know how to catch fish. So just to let you know, I know a little something about fishing. I like to fish. This here is that's 8 kilogram salmon. This actually made it in a newspaper over in Europe. There was a European reporter who wanted to visit the Niagara Falls River. He saw me pull this 12 kilogram beauty out. For those in the States, that's 25 pounds. And then, of course, it doesn't matter what the fish is. People ask me, why? Like, what do you like to fish for? And I'm like, if it swims, I'll catch it. I just love fishing. But I want you to know, and I'm showing you these pictures, not to brag, well, maybe to Yuri, but not to brag. I love you, brother. But to give you a sense of, I know what I'm talking about, and that's important. So I want to share with you 4 fishing tips in this series that will help you become a contagious Adventist. And they are the following. 1, you need to use more than one approach. 2, use the right lures. 3, know your fish. And 4, go where the fish are. Now, this would seem to make, I would hope this would make sense. So I'm going to break these down for you, and today I'm going to deal with an address of, hopefully we have enough time, tip number 1 and tip number 2. So let's talk about using more than one approach. So you see here, I have a number of fishing rods. And this rod right here is what we would call an ultralight fishing rod. I use this for small fish. I might use this for bluegills, maybe for crappies, maybe for perch, maybe for very small fish. David, can you come up, please? I'm going to ask you to stand over here. And I'm going to ask you to hold the tip of the rod. Just hold it firmly. Okay, that's all you, just hold it firmly. To hold your hand in one place. You don't need to come up. Put your hand down here. Leave your hand, leave your hand there as best you can. Folks, see the flexibility in that rod? You can let it go, David. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to stay there. I'm going to ask you to help me. Are you okay with helping me? Fantastic. When you have a 1 kilogram fish on this, it feels like a whale. This is a great rod for kids. It's a lot of fun. It's light and it's flexible, but it is for fish that are 1/2 kilogram to 1.5 kilograms. American friends, that's about 2 pounds. But then I get into bigger fish, and maybe I'm after. Now, oh, by the way, I forgot. I own 3 of these. And I own 3 of these because I've discovered that you have fish that feed at the top, you have fish that feed in the middle, and you have fish that feed on the bottom. And I have a rod for every single one of those fish. I have a rod for the top, the middle, and the bottom. Because I want to catch fish. So, David, we've got the next one. And this one is for trout. I will use this for trout. I will use this for brown trout. I will use this for steelhead. I will use this for rainbows. David, can you grab that, please? And notice how the bend begins to change. It's a little stiffer, a little heavier, because this is for trout in about the 2 to 3 kilogram range. Again, for my American friends, that could be up to 4 to 5 pounds. Now we get into bass. Now we get into bass. And by the way, again, for the trout, I have top, middle, and bottom. And then, David, can you hold on to this one, please? And this will be for bass. And now it gets stiffer, because bass are a heavier fish. And they will fight you inch for inch, pound for pound. They are one of the best fighting fish out there. And again, I have 3 of these. I have for the top water, I have for the mid-zone, I have for the bottom. And again, sometimes, I even have a 4th one, actually. I have 4 of these, because sometimes the bass like to hide in the weeds. And so I will cast out into the water, and I'll bounce a little frog across the top of the water. Or sometimes I'll reel a whopper popper that splashes across the top. Sometimes it's in the middle, and I'm fishing like this. Or sometimes it's on the bottom, and I'll just jig a little and bounce it off the bottom. Now again, why do I do this? Because I want to catch fish. Now, here we go. And sometimes I'm after walleye. And again, I've got 3 rods for walleye. And again, David, can you hold this? And again, this one has a little bit more flexibility in it because when it comes to walleye, they have a softer mouth. So you want a slightly different lift and a different hook set. With a bass, when you get a bass on, you're like, ugh! But with a walleye, you're like, and you just pull up to hook them. And again, about red snapper, sister talked to me after church. So, some of you getting hungry now, aren't you? We got fish lovers in the church. I know what's happening here this morning. But, so, again, now I have this one. And this one, this is for muskie and really big northern pike. These are for the bad boys that can get up to 12 to 15, 17 kilograms in weight. Some of these fish can get up to, for my American friends, 30 to 40 pounds, to put that into perspective. Though I'm not converting correctly here. David, can you hold on to that? You see that? That is for some really heavy fish. And again, David, by the way, thank you for your help. I'm going to ask you to sit down. Can you give him a round of applause, please? I don't yet have 3 of these, but I'm working on it. Okay? So, for my birthday, hon. By the way, you might be thinking the pastor owns a lot of fishing rods. He must be rich. No, I've been collecting these for a very long time. And if you ask me what I want for my birthday, it's a Cabela's gift card because one of these are in my future. But why do I have so many fishing rods? Because here's what I've learned about fishing. No 2 fish respond to the same technique. In the same way, no 2 people respond to the same evangelistic approach. Do you hear me? How I fish for trout is very different than how I fish for the big guys. I mean, I want you to imagine I'm trying to catch a 12-kilogram fish on this. Do you know what would happen to my rod? It would break, right? Now, if I were to catch, a half-kilogram trout on this, do you know what would happen? I wouldn't even feel it. Actually, a half-kilogram trout would be bait on a rod like this. Do you follow what I'm saying? I adjust my approach to the fish I am trying to catch. Because no one approach works for fish. Now, if you were my grandfather, back in the day, he would tell you bamboo or fiberglass was the way to go. And he believed this was the only rod you ever needed to catch fish. It is got poor flexibility. It's not bad on the flexibility. It's not a very sturdy rod. It's not well put together. And this reel here is what we call a push reel, push button reel. And Satan invented this reel. I'm not kidding, because I hate this reel. It was one of the worst inventions ever because it does this. Like it makes a mess every single, like every other cast. It's tangled. I'm taking the cap off. I'm trying to untangle this thing. But my grandfather insisted that the only rod you needed to use for fishing was this. Now, let me ask you, can I catch fish on this? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can catch fish with this, but let me ask you, will there be fish I will miss if this is all I ever choose to use? Again, please don't miss my point. The same is true of evangelism. If you insist that there is only one way to worship, there's only one way to do evangelism, there's only one way to do Bible studies, understand you will catch fish, but you're going to miss an awful lot of people. Right? And here's what you need to know. What attracts one person to Jesus may be the very thing that turns another person away from Jesus. So why is this important? Because we tend to use the same methods that work on us, speak to us, and move us, realizing they may not work for other people. and I'm really going to drive this home in this series. We have fallen into the sin of preaching to ourselves, ministering to ourselves, and doing all the things that make us feel good about being Christians and Seventh-day Adventists, not realizing that what appeals to me as a fully mature Christian will not appeal to somebody who's an unbeliever. Do you follow me? So I want to explain to you a little bit more about how this works. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages? Anybody hear of the 5 love languages? The love languages are basically, according to Dr. Chapman, everybody has a love language. Your love language is how you receive love. It's not how you give love. Listen to me. It's not how you're supposed to give love. It's how you're supposed to receive love. What we discovered in marriage counseling and years of it, the number one mistake most people make is that I tend to love you out of my language rather than yours. So he said there are 5 love languages. There are people who, when you give them a gift, that's love. There are people, when you spend quality time with them, that's love. Acts of service, physical touch, and words of affirmation. Now, I want you to imagine that a person whose love language is gifts marries a person whose love language is words of affirmation. And the person who is into gifts, they're going to the person with affirmation, and affirmation is my love language, but all they do is give them gifts. I'm giving you gifts, I'm giving you gifts, I'm giving you gifts. Why don't you know and understand? I love you, I'm giving you gifts. When you give me gifts, that's love. Gifts speak love to me. Why aren't you receiving? Why am I not getting the reaction I was hoping for? Well, because gifts are not my love language. So what if in a relationship you insist that all we're going to do is give gifts? The person who needs affirmation will literally emotionally starve in that relationship because one size does not fit all. How I love on my wife is different than how I will love on my kids or my stepkids. It's different than how I love on my best friends. What I do is I study the people in my life. I want to understand, how do you receive love so that I know what to do and what to say so that you know I love you. But imagine you're in a relationship where all you do is use the one love language and it's yours and everybody else has to accept it, or the problem is with you. The biggest mistake we are currently making in evangelism and witnessing is that we have taken the attitude that what speaks to us as mature Christians will be the exact same thing that should reach those who are not believers. And if it doesn't reach them, well, it's their fault because I loved on you, I preached to you, I shared with you. The fact that you couldn't receive it is your fault, not mine. The reason we need to use more than one approach in witnessing and in worship and in Bible studies and in everything we do is because no 2 people are the same. So when you go into the world and you leave this church and you go into the world, there are 2 groups of people you are going to encounter. There are going to be believers and unbelievers. 2 groups of people in the world, those who believe, those who do not. Now, when it comes to what is a believer, let me define that for you. A believer is a person who has come to the conclusion that there is a spiritual being out there who is greater than ourselves. Most call that being God. Now, notice I didn't say the believers are Christians. Did you follow me? Because there are a lot of people from other faiths who are spiritual people, and they believe in a force, a being that guides and directs their life. Do you follow me? They believe in some spiritual force or entity or faith. And amongst the believers, there are 3 types of believers you will encounter. Some are seekers. There are people out there who are just saying, there's got to be something out there more than this. If this is all there is, what are we doing here? And let me tell you something. That's one of the most important questions you will ever ask yourself. Why are we here? How did we get here? What's it all about? And seekers are looking for answers to those big questions. And they just have a sense that there's more to life than what is going on around me. And I just have this sense, but there's something in my soul that longs for something spiritual. Because we were made to worship. Did you know that? Then you have the Christians. And among the Christians, and I'm going to refer to, you got your Baptists, your Episcopalians, your Salvation Army, you've got Methodists. There are a number of other Christian denominations out there, and what you need to know, if they're Protestant, you need to know 90% of what they believe, we also believe. So you have a lot in common with those people. And then you have the people from other faiths. You have your Jews, your Muslims, your Hindus, your Buddhists, right? Now here's the thing. If how I go about reaching a seeker is going to be very different than how I'm going to go about reaching a Jew. And how I go about reaching a Jew is going to be very different than how I go about reaching a Christian from another faith. Do you understand? Your technique and your methods of evangelism have to change with the people you're trying to reach. And we cannot assume that what speaks to me as a Seventh-day Adventist is going to speak to a Baptist, or it's going to speak to a Jew. I have to adopt and adapt my techniques to the people I'm trying to catch for Jesus. Because you know what the goal of a fisherman is? Catch fish. Do you know what the goal of a Christian is? Win souls. And we are called not to win arguments. We are not here to win debates. We're not here to prove who's the best or who's right. We're here to prove to the world that Jesus is Lord and you want to follow him. This is the goal of a Christian, and that is to win souls through every method. Hear me, every single method available at our disposal that is righteous. So, principle number 1, no two believers are the same, and as such, do not respond to the exact same approaches. So if we as Seventh-day Adventists want to reach our friends in other faiths and denominations, we need to develop methods that will actually reach them. So the other group is the unbeliever. Now, please pay attention to this. An unbeliever is a person who claims to have no religious affiliation. We would refer to them as being secular. 60% of North Americans fall into this group right now. This 60% have never been to church. They don't go to church. They don't know the Bible stories. They haven't sung the hymns or the songs. As a matter of fact, some of them have never heard of David and Goliath. Some of them have never heard of the flood. 60% of this group have no religious affiliation. They do not go to church. But now notice, I did not say they were all atheists, and I did not say that they had no spiritual inclination. I didn't say they had no interest in spiritual things. As a matter of fact, we have discovered, and I'm going to show you this in a moment, that there is a high spiritual interest among this group. Not all of them, but a number of them. So again, here's what you need to know. It's principle number 2. No two unbelievers are the same in the same way no two believers are the same. We have got to use different methods and different approaches when it comes to our worship, our evangelism, and our Bible studies. I can tell you right now, no two Seventh-day Adventists sitting in this room right now are exactly the same. You're not. So we have to, again, when we worship with you, we use a variety of approaches so that we have a little something for everybody to relate to. So we've been studying 2 things for a lot of years. One of the things we've been studying is why it is that when our youth, and this is across denominations, we've been studying why it is that when our youth reach the age of 18. If you're wondering why this is important to you, listen, please. So many of our youth, right now, when they reach the age of 18, and they're out on their own and they're out from under mom and dad, they leave the church. Kids who went to church school, kids who were in Pathfinders, kids who came to Sabbath school, kids who participated up front, 80% of them leave the church when they hit 18 years of age. And we've been studying this, and we know why. And we also have another problem. We have a problem where the current North American culture, people who are born and raised in North America, hear me. Do you have some people in your life who are born and raised in North America or will be? Hear me. Those people are not coming to church. And we've been studying this for 25 years, and we have a pretty good handle on why one leaves and the other doesn't come, and they're kind of interrelated with one another. And so, again, there have been groups of people who've studied this, and one of the best, one of the organizations that have put a lot of time, effort, and energy into this, and we've had the Barna Group, we've had Pew Research, Project Genesis was one of our own, but there's a man out there by the name of Tom Rainer. And Tom Rainer wanted to know why his friends didn't want to come to church. And he got together with a very large team of people, and for the last 25 years, they've been asking people, why is it you do not come to church? And now we have today the Rainer scale. And he is telling us that, yes, there are absolutely people out there you will not reach, they don't want to be reached. But there are people out there who want to be reached and nobody's going after them because we're assuming now that the secular world just isn't interested anymore. So we have what we call the Rainer scale. And the Rainer scale basically tells us there are 5 types of unbelievers. And they're in your life. You work with them, you go to school with them, you are neighbors with them. These are the people around you that God wants you to reach. And if you want to reach them, you need to understand them. So here's what Rainer said. You've got a group of people, and he represents this by doors. And by the way, I turned it on its side, but you can see the doors that are open and closed, right? He said, you have people who are highly resistant and they are hostile. These are the people who, when you try to have a spiritual conversation with them, they will shut you down. They might curse, they might swear, but they are not open to having a spiritual conversation with you, and they will forcefully tell you. These people are very difficult to reach. These are people you do not approach with a Bible study. These are the people you approach with service and love. You have to love on these people to get that door to even crack. Then you have people who are resistant but not hostile. Those are the people who will say to you, hey, listen, look, you've got your truth, I've got my truth, and you believe what you want to believe, and I'll believe what I want to believe, and, it's good vibes only, and just keep that religion stuff to yourself. And they're very polite about it, but they don't want to have a Jesus conversation. These people are in your life. But then you have people Rainer calls they're neutral. And they might be open to talking. But understand, these are the people who need to approach you first. These are the people in your life who, when they decide that you're a Christian, they will study you. When they discover you're a Christian, they will look at your life. And then when something comes up, they will ask you questions. And you want to be ready for these people when they ask you a question. So, for example, I like to work out at the gym. I like to lift weights. And when I go to the gym, after a while, there's a group of you, you're there, you know each other, you're the old timers, you're the gang together. And you get to know each other. And you get talking. And I wait as long as I possibly can before I tell people what it is I do for a living. Right? So eventually it comes around. So Bob, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, I'm a pastor. And you can see the look on their face. The reason I wait for them to ask me what it is I do is because I know that people get a little strange when they hear you're a pastor. Right? And so I wait. And I wait for them to see the kind of person I am, so they will not judge me by my occupation, but by how I treat them. And then eventually they will come around and they will say, Bob, and this happened to me one time, I'm in the gym. I got some big bros around me and we're crushing it. And then one guy stops and says, listen, Bob, now understand, I'm in Marystown, Newfoundland. It is named after Jesus' mother, Mary. Guess what kind of religious community this is? It's Catholic, highly Catholic, and I got a couple of big gym bros around me going, so what about that mark of the beast? Now, did I start that conversation? Am I open to it? Oh, yeah. And I'm praying real hard right now, right? But who initiated the conversation? They did. And they did because I had established a trust relationship with them. And once they discovered I was a pastor, they watched very hard to see how I treat people. Because they have a history of religious people being mean to them. I got stories. Then you have another group. They are receptive and they are open. They are curious. They're exploring. They've been reading books. They want to have a Jesus conversation. They want to know about Christianity. And you're not the only faith they're studying, but they're studying and they're open. And then you have people who are open and searching. We've had people here at Nepean who've walked in off the street because they were searching. Because they wanted to know about Sabbath keepers. They wanted to know about Jesus. These people are actively searching. There are spiritual people out there who they don't go to church, but they want something more in their life. And how I go about reaching the open and searching is very different than how I would go about approaching people who are hostile. One size does not fit all. And so, here's what we discovered about these people groups. Only 5% of the unbelievers are actually hostile and highly resistant. The other group who are polite only make up 21%. So 26% of North Americans will actually shut you down and not talk to you. Not for a very long time. Now look at this. The people who are possibly open to talking to you once they have a relationship with you, 36% of the population are actually willing to have a Jesus conversation as long as they initiate it. Receptive and open, 27%. Open and searching, 11%. Here's the good news, right? 38% of people are open to hearing about the gospel. Openly open. These are people you work with. People you go to school with. These are your cashiers. This is the waiter or the waitress. There are people all around you who are just waiting for somebody to share what you know. So it's not as hostile out there as you might have been led to believe. People are not as shut down or offended by your witness as you might have been led to believe. 82% of this group would go to church if they were invited. Think about that. You have people around you who would be willing to go to church if you just invited them, which is why we have more than one approach at this church. You can invite somebody to tea. We have tea parties. We have a men's barbecue. Some of us are going to go fishing. When we have our choirs and our concerts, there is so much we do at this church that you can invite people to as a gateway into worship and a further relationship with us. They just want to be asked. 52% feel guilty for not going to church. Invite them. Say, hey, we can alleviate that at Nepean. We'll help you with that. And 70% would love to have a meaningful relationship with a Christian. Oh, come on. You should be saying amen. There are people out there, the harvest is ready. You just got to know where and how to harvest. And again, you cannot reach these people using the same approach that works for you. So here's the bad news. Only 20% of unbelievers have ever received an invitation to attend church. 82% would accept, and only 20% have been invited. Is there a work for us to do? Now, I've been preaching on this for 30 minutes, and I'm hoping this isn't boring you and tuning you out. Because again, one of the problems we're having in Adventism is if it's not about me and directed to me and speaks to me, I'm really not interested. I'm hoping this interests you, because one day your kids are going to grow up to become North Americans, and next week I'm going to share with you why that's so important. So, tip number 1, use a variety of approaches to reaching the lost. Here's tip number 2, find out what they're biting on. Find out what actually appeals to people. Now again, I'm really going to drive this one home. You see, what appeals to you as a mature, spiritually alive Christian often will not appeal to a person who is lost. Did you hear what I just said? Yes. You are spiritually alive. Do you hear me? You've been saved. You've been baptized. You're in a relationship with Jesus Christ. You are spiritually alive. And how I go about reaching people who are spiritually alive is different than how I go about reaching the dead. And the problem we're having is we're tying the hands of evangelists, because when it comes to evangelism, we still want you to preach to us. And how I preach to you is different than how I should be preaching to the lost. So when I get to Revelation chapter 14, it's okay for me to assume that being Adventist, you know some things, that you are studied some of these things, and when I talk to you, I can affirm that the whole commandment-keeping people of God, God's end-time remnant people, I can affirm that for us as a church. That's meaningless to the lost. Do you hear this? So when I talk about us being God's end-time remnant people, that applies to the spiritually alive. But when I go to talk about Revelation 14 to those who are unbelievers, who are lost, I make it about the victorious Jesus. And the problem we're having in evangelism is that when we have an evangelistic series, we want evangelists to talk about the remnant, not the victorious Jesus. We want evangelists to tell us what good little Adventists we are. We're still the right church. We're still God's commandment-keeping people. And you need to hear that. But the lost don't care. They're lost. Our job in evangelism is to raise the dead. And we have tied so many evangelists' hands, because if we don't have all the songs you like, all the sermons you like, and all the Bible texts in the right places, that we love and we like, that says, we've got the truth. If we don't preach that in an evangelistic series, our people walk out on us. Because we want the preaching to be about us. When it becomes about us, it is no longer evangelism. I can't tell you how often I've been a part of an evangelistic series where the members get mad because we make it about the lost. We use sermons and analogies and songs that actually reach the lost. But oh my goodness, I didn't feel good about being an Adventist, so what are you doing? Why did you bring that to church? It is our greatest sin. Hear me. It is our greatest sin to preach to ourselves. And there's a time and a place for that. It's called revival. We need revival messages. I get that. We need to be reminded of what it means to be an end-time people. I've been preaching that. But when it comes to the lost, you have to, as a church, partner with us, understand with us, and give us permission to preach the messages, sing the songs, use the analogies and techniques that actually reach the spiritually dead. And you got to make up your mind, church. Are you going to tie our hands or release us to do the work? knowing that what appeals to you will not appeal to the spiritually lost. That's a hard message to receive, but we're in sin. It is criminal to demand that everything be about us. You got to make me feel good, preacher. Oh, by the way, when I teach that at other churches, yeah, they get quiet like you do too. They do. And then afterwards, people come up to me and go, Pastor, I know you're right. Let me give you an example of how much we get tied to the things we like and prefer. How many of you have ever heard of the ministry It Is Written? Can anybody tell me who the founder of It Is Written is, at least here in Canada? His name begins with George. George Vandeman. Anybody remember George Vandeman? And George would come out and he'd be sitting at his desk. And he'd have this mellow voice and he'd introduce the topic. And then George would come out from behind his desk and he'd kind of stand and sit in front of the desk. And then he would move over to the library. Do you catch the pattern? Behind the desk, in front of the desk, over to the library. Who replaced George Vandeman? No, Henry Fire Robin. And guess what Henry did? Behind the desk, in front of the desk, over to the library. He followed George's example. It worked. It worked for the audience, it worked for them. Do you know who replaced Henry? I heard the name. Sean Boonstra. You know what Sean did? He went over to the library. Now, at this point, my other audiences would say, uh-oh. Do you know why they said uh-oh? Change. Sean went over to the library. He started getting phone calls from Seventh-day Adventists telling him, either you get back behind that desk or we will cut off our support. If we can't allow a pastor to get out from behind a desk, how are we ever going to reach the lost? How are we ever going to implement the changes we need to make a difference in this world? So when it comes to evangelism, our current greatest mistake may be our greatest sin, and that is preaching and witnessing to ourselves. Some 48% of our churches in North America are dying. They're dying. And one of the things we love to do is blame the lost. We blame everybody who leaves the church. It's always them. It's always those other people. And rarely do we ever accept responsibility for the situation we're in. Oh, you see, it's easy for me to accept responsibility for a growing church. Oh, man, I have no problem with that. But when the church is dying, that's everybody else's fault. And we never look inward and ask ourselves, maybe is it us? Is it something we're doing or not doing? I shared with you Deming's Law. Every system, read every church, is perfectly designed to produce the results that they do. Somebody should say mercy. Mercy. Because this is an absolute truth. So if you want different results, what do you need to do? Do things differently. This applies to every area of your life, by the way. If you don't like where your life's going or what's happening in your life, understand you're doing things to produce that result. We have 48% of our churches on a Sabbath morning have 25 or less people worshiping on a Sabbath morning. And we're not taking responsibility for the fact that maybe those churches are designed to produce that result because they absolutely refuse to change. One of the hardest organizations to change is a church. Now, I shared with you Rayner's scale. Today I'm going to share with you Winsor scale. It's my scale. Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been doing this for a long time for the church. And I can tell you the hardest organization in the world is to change is a church. And a lot of it has to do with, I get why we don't want to. Some of it is personal preference. Let me get into the scale. Let me go to the scale, because it's the same scale as those for unbelievers. Same scale. You have people in the church who are hostile and highly resistant to any change in the church. Change the bulletin and it's war. Change the color of the carpet and it's war. There are churches where if the pastor does not stand here and stay here and they move like I do, it's war. They do not want any change in the order of the service, and they work very hard to make sure that nothing enters the church they do not like. I don't like that music. I don't like those songs. I don't like that preaching. It stays out. There are people who will stand at the back of the church on a Sabbath morning and they guard who comes in like a bouncer. Oh, you're not dressed right? Get out. Wrong culture, get out. I don't like your guitar, get out. Oh, it's happened. And these people will rather kill a church and its growth than to see it actually change. And it happens to organizations. Kodak went bankrupt because they absolutely refused to move into the digital age, even though they helped to create it. So we have people in a church who are absolutely hostile to any sense of change. And sometimes I can tell who they are because they got neck and back problems. They don't want to hear. I've been in churches where we talk about what we need to do to reach, and they just sit there and they crack open their Bible because I'm not going to listen to what I'm hearing. And you have some who are nice about it. They won't go to war, but they're like, it ain't happening in my church. You got some who are like, you know what? I think we could do it better. I think that there's maybe a better way to do things, but I'm just quite not sure. And I'm cautious, and I want to be careful. And you have people in the church who are receptive and open. And then you get people who are seeking and searching. I'm telling you, your young adults are seeking and searching. They want to have authentic worship. They want a place where they can serve. They want a church that actually addresses real world issues. They have different questions. Do you know that we as Seventh-day Adventists have perfected answers to questions nobody is asking anymore? But we love those questions because we got the truth. I'm not trying to mock. I'm not here wanting to ridicule. I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm telling you, seeking and saving the lost is it's the job of the church. There's nothing more critically important to the existence of a church than seeking and saving the lost through every method available to us. And here's the truth. One size does not fit all. And as a church, I wish and I hope and pray we'll do what Ellen White said. Experiment, experiment, experiment. And I'm asking you to consider, to go home and pray about this. How determined are you to actually reach the lost people in your life? What are you willing to do? What changes are you willing to try in order to reach the lost and to keep your kids in the church? The reason we're doing this, and again, the reason I'm so passionate about this, is I got people in my life I want saved. I know you do too. But you're not going to reach them if you keep doing the same old, same old, same old, same old. Our pioneers were the kind of people who were willing and open to trying a lot of things in order to find out what people would respond to. As a church, I'm asking you to try new things. Be open to willing to learn. We're not going to do anything immoral or illegal. Do you hear me? We're not going to ask you to go into the Word of God, but we're going to ask you to move out of the 1950s into the 21st century. The last time I said that, I had 10 youth jump up in the church. You hear me? We need to move out of the 1950s. The 50s are over. It's the 21st century. And there is so much that has changed between now and then. And I'm telling you, I'm going to share it with you next week. I want you to become passionate about reaching the lost. Hear my heart. Let's seek and save the lost through every means possible.